The light from 1,000 candles was a cruel and brilliant thing, leaving no shadow for a ruined reputation to hide. As Miss Alara Vance entered the Blackwood ballroom, the whispers followed her like the rustle of silk, a tide of judgment rising to meet her. Across the glittering expanse, Duke Alistair Beaumont watched her, his face a mask of cold indifference, yet his eyes missed nothing. Ilara found refuge in a small alcove, the roar of the ballroom softening to a distant hum. Her uncle, Mr. Finch, found her there, his kind eyes clouded with a familiar sorrow. "You have more courage than I, my dear," he murmured, "to face them." He did not need to name the Vance family misfortune. It was a ghost that attended every party with them, a permanent guest of honor. "My dearest Ilara, you look so very resilient tonight." The voice was Lady Isabel Sterling's, a melody of false sympathy. She approached, a vision in sapphire silk, her smile a perfect polished weapon. "One must admire your fortitude." Her eyes flickered towards the Duke. "His Grace seems in a somber mood. It has been years since the tragedy, of course, but some griefs cast such long shadows." The implication of a shared private knowledge was a subtle, well-aimed dart. Seeking a moment's peace near the refreshment table, Ilara felt a sudden, careless shove from a passing guest. She stumbled, a gasp escaping her lips, but a strong hand shot out, steadying her arm. It was the Duke. For a breath, his dark eyes met hers, a universe of unreadable emotion passing between them. Then, just as quickly, his gloved hand withdrew, and he turned and walked away without a single word, leaving her heart hammering against her ribs. Later, in the quiet solitude of her bedchamber, the evening replayed in her mind. The whispers, Isabel's malice, the Duke's shocking touch. Her gaze fell upon a letter from her uncle, left on her writing desk. As she picked it up, her fingers brushed against the wax seal. It was intact, yet a tiny, almost invisible tear along the edge suggested it had been carefully lifted and resealed. A trick of the light, she told herself, a slip of her uncle's hand. But the seed of unease had been planted. The next morning, in an office smelling of dust and old paper, Duke Alistair Beaumont reviewed a ledger with his solicitor. The man pointed to a name. "The Vance debt remains, Your Grace. It is quite substantial." The Duke stared at the ink for a long moment. "We will not press the matter," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "The family has suffered enough." The solicitor raised a brow but said nothing. The Duke's motives, like his grief, were his own private burdens. The public gardens were a riot of blooming roses, their beauty a jarring contrast to Ilara's unease. She saw the Duke walking the path ahead and turned to avoid him, but he changed course, approaching her with grim determination. "Miss Vance," he began, his voice low and urgent, "I must speak with you regarding your late father's affairs." Before she could reply, a musical laugh interrupted them. "Your Grace, Miss Vance, how lovely to see you enjoying a private stroll." Lady Isabel stood there, flanked by London's most notorious gossips, her eyes wide with feigned innocence and real malice. Their serious private meeting was instantly reframed as a clandestine, romantic tryst. By evening, the poison had spread. The Vance drawing room was dim, reflecting the mood within. "Your reputation will not withstand this, Ilara," Mr. Finch lamented, pacing the worn carpet. Ilara sat straight-backed, her hands clasped in her lap, a portrait of composure she did not feel. "It is a lie, Uncle. It will fade." Just then, the butler appeared at the door, his expression startled. "Forgive me, sir," he announced, his voice trembling slightly. "His Grace, the Duke of Beaumont, is here and insists on seeing you." Duke Alistair entered the room like a storm cloud, his face carved from granite. He wasted no time on pleasantries. "The rumor is unfortunate," he stated, the word wholly inadequate for the ruin it promised. "It is damaging to you and inconvenient for me." He looked directly at Ilara, his gaze intense. "Therefore we will not fight it. We will feed it. We shall appear in public together, as if in a courtship. We will control the narrative until the gossip dies, and then we will go our separate ways." Mr. Finch looked aghast, but Ilara remained unnervingly still, considering the audacious proposal. "I will agree, Your Grace," she said at last, her voice clear and steady. "On two conditions." The Duke's brow furrowed. "First, you will never again mention my family's financial affairs. And second, This arrangement will be one of equals. I will not be an object of your pity." Surprised by her steel, a flicker of respect entered his eyes. He gave a sharp, decisive nod. "Agreed." He extended his hand, and she met it. Their handshake was not a promise of affection, but the sealing of a contract. As his carriage waited in the gray light of pre-dawn, Alistair paused. He had expected tears, hysterics, a plea for mercy. He had not expected terms. Her quiet dignity was a disruption to his grim, orderly world. This was no longer just about managing a social inconvenience. It was about honor. His own. He made a silent vow to the sleeping city. "Before this charade is over, the truth of my own past will be known." The Royal Opera House was a gilded cage, and they were the prize exhibit. As Alistair escorted Alara to his prominent box, a wave of whispers followed them, 1,000 pairs of opera glasses turning in their direction. They sat with a respectable distance between them, exchanging polite, stilted comments about the performance, both acutely aware that the real drama was not on the stage, but in the audience. Across the cavernous room, Lady Isabel watched them, her fan moving with a slow, rhythmic fury. The moment the carriage door closed, a fraction of the tension dissipated. The performance was over. "I confess," Alara said, her voice quiet, "I found the soprano's performance rather shrill, a triumph of volume over talent." Alistair, caught off guard by the dry wit, let out a short, genuine laugh. A brief, startling smile transformed his severe features. "A perfect assessment, Miss Vance. My own thoughts precisely." For a fleeting moment, their bargain was forgotten, replaced by an unexpected spark of intellectual kinship. At the most fashionable modiste's shop, surrounded by bolts of silk, Lady Isabel planted her seeds. "It is all so strange," she confided to a known gossip, her voice laced with concern. "The Duke's interest seems so sudden. One hears whispers, of course. Old family secrets." She paused, letting the silence hang. "You remember the tragedy with his poor brother Edmund? Some say the Vances were involved in the unfortunate business that preceded it. It is all so very dark." The rumor, once planted, took root and grew. In the smoky confines of a gentleman's club, the theory was perfected. "It's not the girl he wants, it's the land," one lord declared to his nodding companions. "The Vance estate bordered the property where young Edmund died. Beaumont wants to control the land to bury the last of that scandal for good. The courtship is a cruel necessity to get what he wants." It was a version of the truth, plausible and ugly, and it spread through the city like a fever. A package arrived at the Vance home, delivered by the Duke's footman. Alara unwrapped it with trepidation, expecting some formal public gesture. Inside there was no jewelry, no perfume, no flowers. It was a book, a rare leather-bound edition of botanical sketches she had once mentioned admiring in passing. It was a gift not for the public eye, but for her, a thoughtful, deeply personal gesture that was entirely at odds with the calculating villain of the rumors. She stood holding it, more confused than ever. He invited her to his townhouse library, a sanctuary of silence and the scent of old leather. Here, surrounded by towering shelves of knowledge, their conversation flowed with an ease that startled them both. As they discussed the botanical sketches, her eyes fell on a miniature portrait on his desk. A young man with Alistair's eyes, but a softer, sadder mouth. "Is this your brother?" she asked gently. The warmth in the room instantly vanished. "That is a private matter," he said, his voice clipped and cold. The wall between them was back, higher than ever. As a footman showed her out, Alara passed a small study down the corridor. The door was ajar, a sliver of light falling across the carpet. Her steps faltered. On a writing desk inside, bathed in that sliver of light, sat a small wooden box, intricately carved. Her breath caught in her throat. The box was identical to one that had belonged to her father, a box he had kept his most private papers in, a box that had vanished after his death. A week later, returning from a tedious public concert, the sky broke open. A torrential rainstorm lashed the London streets, turning them to rivers of mud. A sharp crack echoed from below their carriage, followed by a violent lurch. "The wheel is split, Miss Vance," the driver called. Before she could protest, Alistair was giving orders. "You will take shelter at my home until the storm passes, and your carriage can be repaired. The storm had trapped them, the air in his townhouse thick with unspoken words and the drumming of rain against the glass. They waited in the library, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. Suddenly, a frantic butler appeared. "Your Grace, the skylight in the gallery is leaking." Alistair swore under his breath and rose. "I will see to it." In his haste, he left a heavy ring of keys on the mantelpiece. Ilara's eyes were drawn to it. There, among the large iron keys, was a small, ornate brass one. She recognized its intricate design instantly. It was the key to her father's box. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was a violation, a trespass of the highest order. But the box, it was a piece of her past, a mystery she had a right to solve. With trembling hands, she took the key from the ring and crept down the hall to the small study. The key slid into the lock. It turned with a soft, familiar click. Lifting the lid, she saw not jewels or gold, but a stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon, and resting atop them, the sad-eyed miniature of the Duke's brother. She untied the ribbon and unfolded the topmost letter. The handwriting was elegant but frantic. It was not the Duke's. "My dear Mr. Vance," it began, "by the time you read this, I will have made my final accounting. The fault is mine alone. Our venture has failed, and in my foolishness, I have not only ruined myself, but you, an honorable man who trusted me." Ilara's hand flew to her mouth. The letter was from Edmund Beaumont, Alistair's younger brother. It was a confession of a failed business partnership with her father. And as she read the final, desperate lines, she realized with dawning horror what it truly was. A suicide note. "Now you know." Alistair's voice was quiet, filled with a profound weariness. He stood in the doorway, his shoulders slumped, not with anger, but with the weight of a long-held grief. He had found her there, the letters in her hand. "He took his own life out of shame," Alistair confessed, his gaze fixed on some distant point of memory. "And I knew of his despair. I saw his recklessness, but my pride kept me from reaching out. I thought he would right himself." His voice broke. "My sin was not what the gossips whisper. It was silence. I failed to save him." Ilara looked at this proud, tormented man and felt not pity, but a wave of overwhelming empathy. The family shame she had carried was a shadow. His was a wound. Without a word, she carefully retied the ribbon around the letters and held the bundle out to him. Her gesture was one of absolute trust, a promise that his secret was safe with her. He took them, his fingers brushing hers. As the storm outside finally subsided, they sat in a shared, healing silence. Their bargain of pretense had just become a bond of truth. The next morning, the city was washed clean, the sky a brilliant, clear blue. Alistair escorted her home himself. The silence in the carriage was no longer tense, but comfortable, filled with a new, unspoken understanding. As she stepped down, he paused. From a small vase inside his carriage, he took a single, perfect white rose, its petals still holding a drop of morning dew. He pressed it into her hand, a silent acknowledgement, a new beginning. Their public walks in Hyde Park were different now. The stilted formality was gone, replaced by genuine conversation and shared smiles. They spoke of books and art, of the world beyond the narrow confines of society. Their heads often bent close together in earnest discussion. The gossips were baffled. This looked less like a sham and more like a meeting of minds. From a distance, beneath the shade of a parasol, Lady Isabel watched them, her polite smile tightening as she saw the undeniable ease between them. Their happiness was an affront to her plans. In her opulent drawing room, Isabel stared at her own reflection in a gilded mirror. The quiet affection she had witnessed could not be allowed to flourish. She needed a new weapon, something sharper and more cruel. She recalled the whispers of the Vance financial ruin and the Beaumont tragedy. The truth did not matter. All that mattered was crafting a version that would destroy them. She would not merely separate them, she would turn society against them so completely that they would be ruined, isolated, and utterly humiliated. An invitation arrived for Ilara, embossed with the crest of a respected literary hostess. It was for an intimate salon, a gathering of artists and thinkers. A handwritten note at the bottom read, "His Grace the Duke of Beaumont has already accepted." I do hope you will lend your own intelligence to our evening. Ilara smiled. An evening of genuine conversation, a refuge from the balls and gossip. Feeling a new confidence in herself and her alliance with Alistair, she looked forward to it with sincere pleasure. During the salon, Alistair drew Ilara into the moonlit garden, away from the crowded room. I have something for you, he said, his voice soft with an emotion she had never heard before. He handed her a sealed letter. It is a formal apology to your uncle for the distress my initial plan caused your family. His hand rested on her arm, a gesture of sincere affection. At that precise moment, a gasp came from the shadows. Oh my heavens, Lady Isabel cried, her hand flying to her chest. Forgive me, I did not mean to intrude on your secret transaction. Isabel fled back to the salon, her face a perfect mask of distress. She rushed to the most influential matrons. It was dreadful, she whispered, her voice trembling. I saw him in the garden, forcing some document upon her. She looked so frightened. She leaned in conspiratorially. I fear the rumors are true. It must be a financial contract. He is using her father's old debts to blackmail her, to ruin her completely. And this supposed courtship is the cruelest part of his scheme. The lie was perfect. It contained just enough truth to be believable and was vicious enough to be irresistible. When Ilara and Alistair re-entered the drawing room, the air had turned to ice. Conversation stopped. Faces that had been friendly just moments before were now cold masks of judgment. A lady she had been conversing with earlier literally turned her back as Ilara approached. They were pariahs. A bubble of chilling silence surrounded them in the crowded, buzzing room. They looked at each other, a shared, dawning horror in their eyes. Something terrible had just happened. Lord Ashworth, a man known for his bluntness, stepped forward, his face flushed with self-righteous fury. Your Grace, he said, his voice loud enough for the entire room to hear, to use a lady's family debts to blackmail her into a sham courtship is an act beneath contempt. Alistair stood frozen, the accusation striking him dumb. To defend himself would be to expose his brother's secret, a secret he had guarded for years. Ilara, seeing the impossible choice tearing him apart, stepped forward. You are mistaken, my lord. But her voice was drowned out by the confident murmurs of the crowd. Across the room, Isabel watched, her eyes glittering with triumph. Alistair did not speak. He simply took Ilara's arm, his grip like iron, and turned. He led her from the room, the crowd parting before them like the sea. They walked through the gauntlet of accusing stares, encased in a shroud of public humiliation. Inside the dark, oppressive confines of his carriage, the silence stretched, thick and suffocating. He stared blankly out the window, his profile a study in agony, lost in a private hell she could not reach. Late that night, Alistair paced his library like a caged animal. His gaze fell upon the portrait of Edmund, his brother's sad eyes seeming to follow him. He had built a fortress of silence around Edmund's memory, believing he was protecting his honor. But that fortress had become a prison, and its walls were now crushing an innocent woman. He stopped before the portrait. Forgive me, brother, he whispered to the painted image. I have honored you with silence. Now I must honor you with truth. We are ruined, Mr. Finch said, his voice hollow with despair. But Ilara, though pale as a ghost, was strangely calm. She placed a hand on her uncle's arm. The Duke is an honorable man, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I do not know what he will do, but I know he will do what is right. In the face of public condemnation and absolute ruin, her faith in him was a small, steady flame in the darkness. All the next day, Alistair worked with a cold, methodical purpose. He unlocked the wooden box and removed his brother's final desperate letter. From a safe, he retrieved the old financial ledger that detailed the failed venture, its neat columns a testament to the disastrous truth. He laid them side by side on his desk, the evidence of his public confession. Then he penned a short, formal note to his solicitor requesting his presence at the Archbishop's annual charity ball, the most solemn and public event of the season. The Duke's messenger arrived bearing no grand bouquet, only a single perfect white rose. Tucked among its petals was a small folded card. Ilara opened it. There were no apologies, no explanations, just 3 words written in the Duke's strong, decisive hand. Trust me. Attend. Below was the name of the Archbishop's charity ball. It was not a request, but a summons. A summons to witness either their final destruction or their redemption. The Archbishop's ball was a somber affair, held in a hall that felt more like a cathedral. When Alara arrived, a shocked silence fell. She ignored the stares, her gaze searching. Lady Isabel was there, of course, the queen of the evening, accepting condolences for her distress over the scandal. Then the Duke arrived. The room went utterly still. He ignored everyone, his eyes finding Alara across the vast marble floor. He looked at her, a silent question in his gaze. She gave him the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. "I am with you." Alistair walked to the center of the room, his footsteps echoing in the unnatural silence. "Your attention, please." His voice was clear and strong. "A grave injustice has been done to Miss Alara Vance, and I am the cause of it." He unrolled a letter. "But the sin is not the one you believe." He began to read. He read his brother's tragic final words to a room stunned into absolute stillness. When he was done, he looked up, his face etched with pain. "My sin was not blackmail. It was pride. A pride so vast it kept me from saving my own brother." He then turned his gaze fully on Alara. "My arrangement with Miss Vance began as a desperate act to protect that pride. It ends with me loving the most honorable woman I have ever known." As the last word fell, the Duke's solicitor stepped forward, holding the old ledger aloft. "The Duke speaks the truth. The financial records corroborate every word." The hostess of the literary salon, her face pale with horror at her own part in the gossip, pointed a trembling finger. "It was Lady Isabel. She started the rumor. She told us she saw him blackmailing Miss Vance." Every eye in the room turned on Isabel. Her triumphant smirk dissolved into a mask of pure panic. Trapped in the glare of 100 accusing eyes, she turned and fled, her social reign over in a single devastating moment. In the ringing silence that followed, Alistair stood alone, his secrets and his heart laid bare for all to see. He looked utterly exposed, vulnerable. Then a single figure moved. Alara. She crossed the wide expanse of marble floor, her steps steady and sure. She walked directly to his side and, before the whole of London society, she took his hand in hers. It was a simple, silent act of loyalty, forgiveness, and love. From the front of the room, the Archbishop, the highest moral authority present, began to clap, a slow, deliberate sound. Then another joined, and another, until the hall was filled with the thunder of applause. In the carriage, the silence was no longer heavy, but light, a comfortable peace settling between them. The ordeal was over. Alistair reached across the space and covered her hand with his. His eyes were filled with a gratitude so profound it needed no words. "Thank you," he finally whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Alara simply squeezed his hand. "There is nothing to thank me for," she replied softly. They had saved each other. He sent for her at dawn. She met him in the garden of his London townhouse, the air cool and smelling of damp earth and roses. A new day, a new life. He was waiting for her by a trellis of white climbing roses, the rising sun catching the silver in his hair. He looked at her not as a duke, not as a man burdened by secrets, but simply as a man who was, for the first time in a long time, at peace. "What I did last night was not the end of my atonement," Alistair said, his voice earnest. "It was the beginning. Forgiveness, I see now, is not a moment. It is a path, and I find I cannot walk it alone." He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. "Your quiet strength, your unwavering honor, you have shown me what true nobility is, Alara." He took a breath. "I am not asking you to be my duchess. I am asking you to be my partner, my conscience, my wife." Her heart was too full for grand speeches. She gave him the only answer that mattered. "Yes." A radiant smile broke across his face, wiping away the last shadows of his grief. He reached into his pocket and took out a ring. It was not a glittering diamond, but a heavy gold signet ring, set with a single deep blue sapphire. "This was my brother's," he said softly. "By giving it to you, I am entrusting our family's honor and his memory to your care." He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. And then, in the light of the rising sun, he kissed her. He went with her to her uncle's home, and with a humility that would have once been unthinkable, formally asked Mr. Finch for his niece's hand. Mr. Finch, His eyes streaming with tears of joy, could barely speak. He clasped the Duke's hand in both of his. "Your Grace," he finally managed, "you have not just gained a wife. You have restored the honor of two families." It was a moment of absolute healing, of pure, unblemished happiness. The engagement of the Duke of Beaumont to the famously honorable Miss Vance became the story of the season. Society, in its fickle way, now celebrated the match with fervent enthusiasm. Elara was no longer the subject of scornful whispers, but of admiring ones. She was lauded for her loyalty, her grace, her quiet strength. As she and Alistair were seen about town, planning their wedding, they moved with the easy, unshakable confidence of two people who had faced the worst together and emerged whole. On the eve of her wedding, Elara sat at her small writing desk, the sapphire ring glowing in the candlelight. She took out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. "My dearest father," she wrote, "tonight your name is spoken with respect in this city, and tomorrow I will marry a man who understands, as you did, that true honor is a matter of the heart." She sealed the letter not to be sent, but to be kept. A final closing of a painful chapter and the quiet beginning of a new one. A year later, Elara, now Duchess of Beaumont, knelt in the flourishing rose garden of their country estate. The scent of blooming flowers filled the warm summer air. Alistair came and knelt beside her, his hands covering hers on the handle of her gardening shears. They worked together in a comfortable, familiar silence, tending to the new life they were cultivating all around them. It was a quiet life, a purposeful life, a life of shared, sacred peace. Dear listener, perhaps you, like Elara, have known the sting of being misjudged. Perhaps you have carried a burden that was not yours to bear, or have felt the chill of a room that has turned against you. This story is a reminder that the truth of your character is not written in the whispers of others, but in the quiet, steady actions of your own heart. True worth is rarely loud. It is proven in silence and in grace. Redemption is not a gift freely given, but a path bravely walked. If you were in her place, would you have found the strength to forgive him? Elara awoke to unfamiliar sunlight streaming through tall arched windows. For a moment, she was lost, before the comfortable weight of Alistair's arm around her reminded her where she was. Home. He was already awake, watching her with a quiet affection that still made her heart stir. "Good morning, my Duchess," he murmured. "Are you ready to begin your reign over Beaumont Hall?" She smiled. "I believe my first decree will be for coffee." The household staff of Beaumont Hall stood assembled in the Great Hall, a formidable line of black and white uniforms. At their head was Mrs. Gable, a housekeeper whose stern expression suggested she had seen duchesses come and go. Alistair made the formal introductions, but instead of issuing orders, Elara simply smiled. "I am honored to be here," she said. "I have much to learn, and I will be relying on your expertise." A flicker of surprise and perhaps respect crossed Mrs. Gable's face. In the dusty estate office, Alistair explained the ledgers with an air of dutiful boredom, assuming she would feign interest for a moment before retreating. But Elara leaned closer, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This quarterly expense for grain," she said, tracing a column of figures with her finger. "It seems to have been miscalculated for the last 3 years. A small error, but a persistent one." Alistair stared at her, then at the ledger. He was not just surprised, he was deeply impressed. He had married a partner in every sense of the word. A letter from London arrived, bearing her uncle's familiar script. Elara read it in the sunlit morning room, a soft smile on her face. "My dearest niece," he wrote, "you will be pleased to hear that the world has turned. Lady Isabel has removed to Italy, it is said, in disgrace. Her name is now a cautionary tale whispered behind fans." Elara felt no triumph, only a quiet sense of justice. The storm had passed for everyone. Their first tour of the tenant village was an eye-opening experience. The people were respectful, but their cottages were small, and their children, though bright-eyed, had little to occupy their minds. That afternoon, walking with Alistair, Elara spoke her thoughts. "They need a school," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "A proper schoolhouse with books and a real teacher. I have my own inheritance from my mother. I should like to use it for this." Alistair stopped on the path, deeply moved by her immediate, selfless generosity. "Your inheritance will remain he said firmly. "The Beaumont estate will fund this school. It is our duty. He looked down at the village below, then back at her, his eyes shining with pride. And we will name it for you. It will be your legacy. They stood together on the hill, no longer just a duke and his duchess, but two people united in a shared dream. The portrait gallery was an intimidating place. Generations of stern-faced Beaumonts stared down from their gilded frames, their expressions seeming to question her right to be there. For a moment, Alara felt a familiar pang of inadequacy. Could she, the quiet daughter of a disgraced merchant, ever truly belong here? Alistair found her there and seemed to understand her thoughts immediately. You are not meant to be one of them, he said softly, taking her hand. You are meant to be you, and that is why this house is finally alive again. He led her to the end of the gallery, where a new portrait hung, veiled in velvet. There was one piece of our past that needed to be brought into the light, he said, and pulled the cord. It was a portrait of Edmund, his gentle, melancholy face perfectly captured from the miniature. For years I hid him in a box, a symbol of my shame, Alistair said, his voice thick with emotion. You gave me the courage to remember him with love. This final act of grace was the quiet, profound closing of his deepest wound. That evening they sat by the fire in their private sitting room. The great house was silent around them. Alara read aloud from a book of poetry, her calm voice a soothing melody in the quiet room. Alistair leaned back in his chair, his eyes closed, simply listening. There was no need for performance, no need for conversation. There was only a perfect, established peace, the kind that comes from a love that is as comfortable as it is deep. Alara paused in her reading, her hand resting thoughtfully over her stomach. What is it? Alistair asked, opening his eyes. She didn't answer with words. She simply looked at him, a slow, radiant smile spreading across her face. He followed her gaze to her hand, and understanding dawned. His own eyes widened, first in shock, and then with a joy so pure and profound, it seemed to light the room more brightly than the fire. Winter settled over Beaumont Hall, blanketing the gardens in frost. Alara, wrapped in a heavy cloak, walked the dormant paths with the head gardener, a man as gnarled and sturdy as an old oak. They were not discussing idle pleasantries, but the precise placement of new French rose cultivars for the spring planting. Her questions were sharp, her knowledge of soil and sunlight surprising. She was not just the Duchess. She was the mistress of this land, and she was learning its secrets. Over breakfast, Alistair read from a letter. My friend writes from London, he said, a smile in his voice. He says your uncle, Mr. Finch, was the guest of honor at Lord Harrington's soiree. It seems his association with the Duchess of Beaumont has made him quite the sought-after guest. Alara felt a surge of quiet happiness. The warmth of their new life was reaching out, healing old wounds she had thought were permanent. Spring arrived, and with it, the day for the breaking of ground for the new school. The entire village was assembled in the field, their faces bright with hope. Alistair made a brief speech, but his closing words were for his wife. This school is a testament to the vision and compassion of your Duchess, he said to the crowd, his eyes on Alara. To the cheers of the tenants, she took the ceremonial silver spade and turned the first patch of earth, planting a seed of knowledge for generations to come. The architectural plans for the school were spread across the vast desk in the estate office. It is excellent, Alara said, tracing the layout. But I wonder, could we add a small wing here? A library, not just for the students, but for the entire village. Alistair looked at the plans, then at his wife, his admiration for her unending thoughtfulness clear on his face. An outstanding idea, he agreed immediately. Consider it done. There were still difficult days. On the anniversary of Edmund's death, a shadow fell over Alistair. He retreated to his study, the new portrait of his brother, his only companion. He did not speak of his grief, but it was a quiet, heavy presence in the house. Alara knew that redemption did not erase memory, and that some sorrows become a part of you, a quiet river of grief that runs beneath the surface of a happy life. Alara entered the study later that day. She brought no tea, offered no facile words of comfort. She simply came and sat in the chair beside his, taking his hand in hers. She offered him the profound gift of her silent, understanding presence. After a long moment, he squeezed her hand and leaned his head against her shoulder, a weary gesture of complete trust. He did not have to bear his grief alone anymore. They stood at a tall window, a shared woolen blanket wrapped around their shoulders, and watched the first snowfall of winter. Fat, silent flakes drifted down, covering the formal gardens and the wild hills beyond, in a blanket of pure, untouched white. The world seemed to hold its breath, and in the quiet of the moment, they stood together, perfectly content, two hearts beating as one in their peaceful kingdom. The following spring, the Alara Vance School opened its doors. The new building smelled of fresh-cut pine and possibility. The village children, scrubbed and shy in their Sunday best, filed into the bright, sunlit classroom for the first time. Alara and Alistair stood in the doorway, watching the future of their estate learn to read. A quiet, profound satisfaction settled over them. This was a legacy more enduring than any title or stone wall. A small girl with bright, curious eyes tugged on Alara's sleeve. "Your Grace," she asked, "why did you build us a school?" Alara knelt to be at her level, her grand silk dress pooling on the simple wooden floor. "Because," she answered softly, looking into the child's eyes, "I believe every person deserves the chance to show the world how clever and good they are, no matter who their family is." Summer returned to the gardens, and the roses bloomed with an almost impossible vibrancy. Alara sat on a stone bench, cradling their infant son in her arms. Alistair came and sat beside her, wrapping his arms around them both, creating a small, perfect world of their own. "He has your eyes," she whispered. "He will have your strength," he replied. "We shall call him Edmund." It was not a name of sorrow anymore, but a name of hope. A final, loving tribute to the brother whose tragedy had, in the strangest of ways, brought them together. As the sun set, its last golden rays touched the imposing gates of Beaumont Hall. For years they had been a symbol of the Duke's isolation, a barrier against the world. But now as the camera lingered on them, they stood wide open, a welcoming embrace to the peaceful valley beyond. They were no longer the gates to a fortress of grief, but to a home filled with light and love. On a quiet evening, Alistair took out the familiar wooden box. He showed Alara that a new letter now rested atop the old faded ones. "I wrote to him," he said softly, "to Edmund, to tell him everything, to tell him about you." He had finally been able to speak to his brother not with guilt, but with peace, explaining how his tragedy was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new one, a story of redemption, a story of love. Mr. Finch's first visit to Beaumont Hall was an emotional affair. As he stood in the magnificent great hall, his eyes filled with tears, seeing his once shunned niece presiding with such quiet grace and happiness. Later, he and Alistair shared a glass of brandy in the library. There were no grand apologies, only a quiet mutual respect between two men who loved Alara dearly. The old debts, both financial and emotional, were finally and fully paid. At their first formal dinner party, Alara caused a subtle stir. She had invited the new headmistress of the village school, a brilliant but decidedly middle-class woman, to join them. More than that, she had seated her at the main table, a breach of stiff, aristocratic protocol. A few eyebrows were raised, but Alistair simply smiled his approval. The old, rigid rules of society had little place in the new world they were building together, a world based on character, not birth. While sorting through old correspondence, Alara found it. The very first letter her uncle had sent her upon her arrival in London, the one with the strangely torn wax seal. She smiled to herself, the memory no longer unsettling. She could picture it now, the proud, burdened Duke, clumsily trying to understand the situation he had inherited, having the letter intercepted. It wasn't an act of malice. It was the first fumbling step of the guarded, protective man she had come to love. They stood together in the nursery, watching their son sleep in his cradle. "For so long," Alara mused softly, "I felt the name Vance was a weight, a mark of shame." Alistair nodded. "And I felt Beaumont was a fortress I had to defend, a name tied to grief." He reached out and gently touched the baby's cheek. "He will carry a name," he said, "that we have redefined together, not with pride or shame, but with honor and love." Alara was walking in the gardens when one of the students from her school, a shy but fiercely intelligent girl from a tenant farm, approached her. The girl confided that, thanks to the school's library, she dreamed of one day attending university. Alara saw a reflection of her younger self in the girl's quiet ambition. A mind is a precious thing, Ilara told her warmly. You must cultivate it, and I will do everything in my power to help you. Preparing for a ball, Ilara stood before her mirror. Years ago, this ritual had been a painful reminder of all she was not. Not beautiful, not charming, not the diamond of the season. But now she saw something different in her reflection. She saw a woman who was respected, loved, and content. She saw a duchess. She finally understood that her true worth was not something that could ever be reflected in glass, because it had been inside her all along. Years had passed. At a small, intimate ball in their own home, Alistair led her to the floor. The awkward, stiff performance of their first public appearances was a distant memory. Now they moved as one, their steps perfectly in time, their heads bent close in a conversation no one else could hear. They danced in a world of their own, oblivious to the watching eyes, their connection no longer a pretense for society, but a pure, effortless, and authentic joy. On their anniversary, by the warm light of the library fire, Ilara made a request. Alistair retrieved the wooden box, and for the first time, he read Edmund's final, tragic letter aloud to her. The words were still filled with sorrow, but they had lost their power to wound. They were no longer a source of shame or a dark secret, but a shared piece of their history, a story of a tragedy that had been honored, mourned, and finally redeemed by the life they had built together. They were older now, their hair silvered by time. They walked hand in hand through the grounds at dusk, their comfortable silence a testament to a lifetime of shared understanding. They paused on a familiar hill, looking back at the warm golden lights of Beaumont Hall twinkling in the twilight. Their home, a beacon of peace they had built together, a sanctuary from the storms of the world. In the rose garden, Alistair led her to a new cultivar, a rose with petals of the deepest crimson, edged in the softest white. The gardeners and I have been working on it for years, he said, his voice filled with a quiet pride. It has just won the Royal Horticultural Prize. We have named it the Duchess Ilara. It was the perfect tribute, a unique, resilient, and beautiful thing that had brought new life and honor to his home. Years later, a frail but elegant Ilara sat in a comfortable chair in the corner of the bustling school library she had founded so long ago. She watched, her heart full, as the great-grandchildren of their first tenants eagerly read books she had chosen. On the wall, a simple brass plaque read, "This library is dedicated to the enduring power of knowledge in loving memory of Edmund Beaumont." Their shared sorrow had been transformed into a lasting legacy of hope. An elderly Alistair sat with his grown son, also named Edmund, in the library. He told him the whole story, of his uncle's tragedy, of his own pride, and of the remarkable woman who had taught him the true meaning of honor. Then he took the sapphire signet ring from his own hand and passed it to his son. "Wear this," he said, his voice steady, "and remember that our family's greatest strength is not its title, but its truth." The final image is a quiet one. On a green hill overlooking the estate, in a peaceful country churchyard, stand two weathered headstones side by side. Alistair Beaumont, beloved husband and duke, and next to it, Ilara Beaumont, beloved wife and duchess. A single perfect Duchess Ilara rose has been placed at the base of each stone, an image of a life fully lived and a love story that had come to its gentle, final rest. As the camera lingers on the two peaceful stones, a sound begins to fade in, not of sorrow but of joy, the sound of children's laughter. The scene dissolves from the quiet churchyard to the bustling yard of the Ilara Vance School, filled with life, energy, and the bright promise of the future. The Duke and Duchess were gone, but the legacy of hope they had built together was very much alive. In the bustling kitchens of Beaumont Hall, a young maid complained about a difficult task. The stern housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, overheard. "Do it right and do it without complaint," she sniffed. "The new Duchess notices everything. She may be quiet, but she is clever. This house has not been run with such sense in 30 years. It was the highest praise the formidable woman had ever given. During a rare visit to London, Alistair stopped by his club. His old acquaintances gathered around, but the tone was different now. There was a new respect in their eyes. "Marriage suits you, Beaumont," one remarked. "Your Duchess is a woman of rare quality. You chose well." Alistair simply smiled, knowing they had no idea just how well he had chosen. For their first anniversary, Alistair's gift was not jewelry, but a simple, elegant journal bound in dark green leather. "You gave me back my family's honor," he told her. "I thought it only right to give you a place for your thoughts, which I value more than any jewel." They spent the day in the garden, celebrating not with grand gestures, but with the quiet, profound joy of being together. It was a difficult duty. Ilara sat in the estate office with a tenant farmer whose neglect had ruined a field. With a gentle but firm voice, she explained that his lease could not be renewed. But in the same breath, she offered him a letter of reference and a severance to help his family relocate. She was not just a kind duchess, she was a fair and just one, a true steward of the land and its people. Years after the scandal, they returned to the Blackwood ballroom, the scene of Ilara's first humiliation. But this time she was not a wallflower shrinking in the shadows. As the Duchess of Beaumont, she was a respected figure. Lords and ladies sought her opinion on politics and literature. She moved through the glittering room with a quiet, unshakable confidence. Alistair at her side, a united, formidable pair. The room no longer held any power over her. In the crowd, she saw a woman who had once been one of Isabel's chief gossips. The woman rushed over, her smile fawning. "Your Grace, you look magnificent." Ilara met her gaze, her expression polite but cool. "Thank you," she said, and then, with a slight, dignified nod, she turned away, ending the conversation. She had not forgotten, but she had risen so far above it that it no longer mattered. "You cannot be a duchess and not know how to ride," Alistair had declared with mock seriousness. In the paddock, he patiently led her horse, teaching her to hold the reins. She was clumsy at first, and her squeal of laughter when the horse trotted unexpectedly echoed across the fields. The scene was light-hearted and filled with a simple, uncomplicated joy, a testament to the deep friendship that was the bedrock of their love. At the annual Harvest Festival, the Duke and Duchess were not remote figures watching from a dais. They mingled with their tenants, Alistair judging the prize-winning sheep, and Ilara tasting pies with the farmers' wives. They were a part of the community, not above it. As the fiddles played and the dancing began, the joy on the village green was a reflection of the happiness they had brought to Beaumont Hall. Relaxing by the fire after a long day, Alistair looked at Ilara with a wry smile. "Do you recall," he said, "when all of London was convinced I was a villainous blackmailer?" Ilara laughed, a rich, genuine sound. "And I was your desperate, ruined victim." The memory held no sting, only the shared private amusement of a story that had begun in scandal but had ended in a love deeper than either of them could have imagined. In her study, Ilara sketched a design for a new bookplate for the thousands of volumes in the Beaumont Library. She expertly intertwined the fierce griffin of the Beaumont crest with the gentle, climbing stem of a single, perfect rose. It was a visual representation of their union, his strength and her grace, her resilience and his honor, a new legacy forged together. On a quiet afternoon, Ilara sat alone in a pew of the small village church. Sunlight streamed through the old stained glass windows, painting the stone floor in jewels of light. She did not pray aloud. It was a moment of quiet, internal gratitude, a humble acknowledgement of the incredible, unexpected journey her life had taken, from the shadows of shame into this peaceful, sunlit grace. They were old now, their steps slower, but their hands still fit together perfectly. At the end of a long summer, Alistair found the last rose blooming in the garden. He plucked it, and with the same gentle reverence as all those years ago in London, he gave it to her. "The first and the last," he said softly. She smiled, her eyes shining with a lifetime of love. They turned and walked together toward the house as the sun set on their beautiful, shared life. "The Vance affair requires a delicate touch, Your Grace," the solicitor had warned Alistair before the season began. "Their ruin was connected, however tangentially, to your family's tragedy. Any heavy-handedness regarding the debt could provoke unfortunate speculation." The warning had been a seed of caution, one that Alistair, in his pride, had initially ignored. Before her life became entangled with the Dukes, Ilara's days had a quiet purpose. She spent her afternoons at a small charity, serving thin soup to the city's forgotten poor. Here, away from the judging eyes of the ton, her worth was never in question. It was measured in a warm smile, a gentle word, and a bowl filled for a hungry child. In her boudoir, Lady Isabel dismissed her maid with a wave. She stared at her own perfect reflection, her beauty a source of both power and frustration. The Duke had been polite, but distant, his attention elsewhere. An insult. She was the diamond of the season. The dukedom, the Beaumont title, it was her due. And she would not allow a plain, penniless nobody to stand in her way. Late one night, in the solitude of his study, Alistair opened a small locked case. Inside, nestled on dark velvet, lay a heavy sapphire signet ring. He did not touch it. He simply looked at it, his expression a mixture of profound sorrow and guilt. The ring was not a symbol of his power, but a reminder of his greatest failure. After an evening of parading their false courtship, Elara sank onto her bed, exhausted. The weight of the constant scrutiny, the whispers, the false smiles was immense. For a moment, she allowed herself to doubt. Was this charade worth the cost to her spirit? Then she straightened her shoulders. Her family's honor had been questioned once. She would endure this to ensure it was never questioned again. His Grace seems lighter, the housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, observed to the Duke's longtime butler. The butler polished a silver tray, his expression thoughtful. "It is Miss Vance," he replied with quiet certainty. "I have not seen him smile, a true smile, since Master Edmund was alive. She has brought a light back into this house." Browsing the endless shelves of the Duke's library, Elara pulled out a slim volume of Shelley. On the flyleaf, an inscription in a familiar, elegant hand read, "To my dearest brother, Alistair. May you find more joy in life than I have. Edmund." The melancholy words sent a chill through her, a glimpse into a sorrow far deeper than she had imagined. Lady Isabel held court at a tea party, basking in the glow of her apparent victory. "It is a tragedy, of course," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "to see a great man brought so low by his baser instincts. But one must expose such wickedness." She believed with absolute certainty that she had saved the Duke from a schemer and that he would soon turn to her in gratitude. Before the ball, Alistair sought a private audience with the Archbishop. In the quiet wood-paneled study, he confessed the entire story, his voice low and steady. He was not seeking absolution. He was seeking clarity. "What is the most honorable path?" he asked. The old Archbishop looked at him with wise, compassionate eyes. "Honor, your Grace," he said gently, "is rarely found in silence. It is found in truth." For the Archbishop's ball, the night that would decide her fate, Elara chose her gown with care. She ignored the fashionable silks and velvets. Instead, she selected a gown of the simplest, purest white, without lace or adornment. It was not a plea for innocence, but a declaration of it. It was her armor, a quiet statement of the truth she carried in her heart. As Elara descended the stairs, ready to leave for the ball, her uncle met her at the bottom. He took her hands in his. "I do not know what tonight holds, my dear," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I know that you have acted with more integrity and grace than anyone I have ever known. And I am so very proud of you." The morning after the ball, the newspapers told the story. "Duke of Beaumont reveals family tragedy to defend lady's honor," one headline blared. Lady Isabel Sterling implicated in vicious plot. The court of public opinion, once so cruel, had reversed its verdict completely. The truth once spoken had been absolute. The Dowager Duchess of Beaumont, Alistair's aunt, arrived like a warship clearing for action. She was old, formidable, and deeply skeptical of this scandalous match. But over a tense tea, Elara did not flatter or fawn. She spoke intelligently and honestly. By the end of the visit, the Dowager took a sapphire brooch from her own collar and pinned it to Elara's gown. "Welcome to the family, my dear," she declared. "The boy has more sense than I gave him credit for." They stood on a balcony at Beaumont Hall, watching the last vestiges of sunlight paint the clouds in shades of rose and gold. They did not speak. There was no need. The peaceful end of the day was a perfect reflection of the quiet contentment they had found in each other's company. A fierce autumn rain lashed against the library windows, a distant echo of the storm that had changed everything between them. But this time, there was no tension, no fear. Inside, a warm fire crackled in the hearth. Elara and Alistair sat in comfortable chairs, reading, the storm a mere backdrop to their perfect, quiet peace. They had found their shelter from all storms. Alistair presented Elara with a deed tied in a ribbon. "I have purchased a cottage for your uncle," he said simply, "just at the edge of the village, so he might be close to us." Ilara's eyes filled with tears at this profound act of kindness. "Your family," Alistair said, taking her hand, "is my family now." The grand ballroom at Beaumont Hall had been closed for years, its furniture shrouded in white sheets like ghosts of a happier time. "It has been silent since before Edmund passed," Alistair said quietly. Ilara took his arm. "Then it is time we filled it with music again," she replied. He looked at her, then at the ghostly room and nodded. It was time to let the joy back in. Over tea, Alistair recounted a frustrating meeting with a local magistrate. "The man is a monument to stubborn incompetence," he sighed. "Indeed," Ilara replied without looking up from her book. "It is a pity they do not give prizes for it. He would be wealthy." Alistair choked on his tea, then broke into a hearty laugh, a sound that was becoming more and more common in the halls of his home. The head gardener approached the Duchess with the reverence of a man presenting a crown jewel. It was a single perfect blossom of the Duchess Ilara rose. "It won first prize at the county show, Your Grace," he said, beaming. "The gardens have not been so alive, so happy in all my years." Ilara gently touched a petal, her heart full. The library table was covered in maps of Italy. "And here," Alistair said, his finger tracing a line to Florence, "is where you will see the Botticellis you have only ever seen in prints." He was as excited as a boy, his joy not in seeing the world again himself, but in showing it to her, in watching her eyes light up with the wonder of it all. A letter from an acquaintance on the continent contained a piece of news. "Lady Isabel Sterling has married," it read. "A minor Italian count with a crumbling palazzo and considerable debts. A sad end for the diamond of the season." Alistair read the line and felt nothing but a quiet, distant pity. His world was so full of light now, there was no room for old animosities. The small village church was packed to the rafters for the christening of Edmund Finch Beaumont, the new heir. The baby, swaddled in lace, was blissfully unaware of the joy surrounding him. Mr. Finch stood as godfather, his chest puffed with pride. It was a celebration not just of a new life, but of a new beginning for the entire community. Late that night, Alistair stood in the doorway of the nursery, watching his wife and son sleep in the soft moonlight. A wave of gratitude so powerful it almost brought him to his knees washed over him. He had been a man encased in grief and pride, and he had come so close to letting happiness pass him by. He would spend the rest of his life being thankful for the quiet, honorable woman who had saved him from himself. In the garden, their toddler son took a few wobbly steps across the lawn, his arms outstretched for balance. He stumbled, then looked up at his father with a determined expression and said his first clear word, "Up!" Ilara and Alistair exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated parental joy, laughing as Alistair swept his son into the air. In the dusty attic, Ilara opened an old trunk filled with her father's belongings, his books, his spectacles, a faded portrait. The familiar ache of shame that had accompanied these memories for so long was gone. It was replaced by a quiet, bittersweet love. She was no longer just the daughter of a ruined man. She was the wife of a redeemed one, and she had made peace with all the ghosts of her past. They rode their horses to the edge of the moors, the wild, wind-swept expanse stretching out before them. The wind tugged at Ilara's hair, and the air smelled of heather and earth. They sat in silence, looking out at the rugged, beautiful landscape that was their home. They belonged here, together, a part of this timeless land. In the great library, by the light of a crackling fire, Ilara sat with her young son curled beside her, reading him a tale of knights and dragons. It was the same room where she and Alistair had first spoken of books, the same room where they had forged their true alliance. Now it was a room filled with the warmth of a new generation, a place where stories, both old and new, were treasured. At their quiet dinner, Alistair raised his glass. "To my wife," he said, his eyes meeting hers across the table. He did not toast her beauty or her title. "To her unfailing heart, in her courageous soul," he said. It was the most beautiful compliment she had ever received. The carriage pulled up to a charming, newly built cottage at the edge of the village. Mr. Finch stepped out, his face a picture of disbelief and joy. Ilara and Alistair were there to greet him. "Welcome home, Uncle," Ilara said, hugging him tightly. He was not a visitor or a dependent, but a cherished member of their family, finally at peace. The grand ballroom, once shrouded in dust and sorrow, was ablaze with light. Music and laughter spilled from its open doors. For the first time in a generation, Beaumont Hall was hosting a ball. At the center of it all, the Duke and Duchess shared the first dance. A radiant, happy couple who had banished the ghosts and filled their home with life once more. As Elara prepared for bed, a ray of moonlight fell across her hand, igniting the deep blue fire of the sapphire ring. She smiled softly. It was a symbol of so much, of a brother's memory, a husband's honor, and a love that had been strong enough to heal the past and build a beautiful future. Years later, Elara received a letter with a university seal. It was from the bright tenant girl she had encouraged so long ago. The girl had won a full scholarship to study mathematics. "You taught me that my circumstances did not have to define my future," she wrote. It was a single powerful testament to the quiet, profound legacy Elara had built. Alistair stood with his teenage son before the portrait of the first Edmund. He told the boy the whole story, not as a dark secret, but as a lesson in honor, pride, and the redeeming power of love. The shame that had haunted the portrait for so long was finally gone, replaced by the quiet dignity of honest memory. After telling him the story, Alistair retrieved the wooden box and handed his son the original, fragile letter. He trusted him with the full weight of their family's past, with its sorrows and its triumphs. The cycle of shame and secrecy that had defined the Beaumont men for a generation was finally and completely broken. For their 50th wedding anniversary, they hosted no grand party. They spent the day in the garden, reading and talking. 50 years, Alistair said, taking her aged hand in his. The best decision I ever made. It was a scandalous arrangement, she teased gently. It was my salvation, he replied, his voice filled with a lifetime of love. The day came when an elderly Alistair handed the estate ledgers to his son, the new Duke. It was a quiet transition, a peaceful passing of responsibility. Your mother, Alistair told him, his voice frail but firm, has the best mind in this family. Listen to her. She will never steer you wrong. In their last days, they would sit together on a balcony, wrapped in blankets, and watch the sunset. Words were no longer necessary. A shared lifetime of love, sorrow, and joy existed in the comfortable silence between them. A bond that had weathered every storm and had now come to its peaceful, golden twilight. Long after they were gone, their son Duke Edmund stood in the schoolyard, discussing plans for a new wing with the headmistress. He had his mother's thoughtful eyes and his father's quiet authority. The work they had started, the legacy of hope and opportunity, was in strong and loving hands. Generations later, a little girl with Elara's amber eyes found a leather-bound journal in the library. She opened it to the first page, and in a clear, elegant hand, read the first line, "A whisper from the past. They say a name is a burden or a crown, but I have come to believe it is simply a story waiting to be written." After another stinging social snub, Elara found her solace not in tears but in ink. In a small notebook, she sketched the intricate veins of a fallen leaf, her mind finding peace in the quiet, orderly beauty of the natural world, a world far kinder than the ballroom. The dining room in Alistair's London townhouse was a cavern of polished mahogany and silent portraits. At one end of the vast empty table, the Duke dined alone, a single isolated figure in a world of immense wealth and profound loneliness. The whisper that began in the garden spread through London on currents of tea and malice. A quick montage of knowing glances over fans, secretive huddles in carriages, and triumphant smirks over card tables showed the rumor taking flight. A poisonous bird finding purchase in every corner of the city. Walking home through the park, her heart heavy with the weight of the scandal, Elara saw a small boy trip and send his parcels scattering. Without a second thought, she knelt and helped him gather his things, her gentle words soothing his tears, her own quiet dignity untouched by the cruelty of others. Alistair awoke with a gasp, his heart pounding, the ghost of a name on his lips. Edmund. The nightmare, a recurring visitor, had come again, dragging him back to the guilt and sorrow he kept locked away during his waking hours. During a soaring aria at the opera, Elara was moved to tears. She glanced at Alistair and found him already looking at her, his own eyes filled with a shared, unguarded appreciation for the music. For a fleeting second, the wall between them crumbled, and two souls connected in a moment of pure, unexpected harmony. Lord Harrington is a fine man, a friend advised Isabel. A respectable title and a considerable fortune. Isabel waved a dismissive hand. His fortune is respectable. The Duke's is legendary. I have no interest in second best. Her ambition was as cold and hard as a diamond. A sudden downpour caught them in the park. Without a word, Alistair threw his heavy greatcoat over both their shoulders, and they ran for shelter, huddled together. The absurdity of their situation, two stiff aristocrats soaked to the skin, struck them both at once, and they broke into a shared, genuine laugh. In his study, Alistair struggled with a book of modern poetry Alara had praised. The metaphors were baffling, the sentiments overwrought. But he persisted, trying to see the world through her eyes, a small, earnest effort to bridge the gap between his world of ledgers and her world of feelings. As Alara prepared to leave for an evening with the Duke, Mr. Finch watched from the doorway. He saw a new light in her eyes, a confidence in her posture he had not seen before. For the first time since his brother's ruin, he felt a flicker of real, unburdened hope for their future. At her desk, Lady Isabel practiced her penmanship, carefully mimicking the frantic, looping style of a distressed gentlewoman. A well-placed, forged note, lamenting the Duke's cruel pressure, would be the perfect kindling for the fire of scandal she was about to ignite. The morning after the confession, Alara went to her window and threw it wide open, letting the crisp, clean air flood the room. She took a deep, cleansing breath. The weight of secrecy and scandal was gone. She was free. On the first morning of his engagement, Alistair walked into the great hall of his London home, a space that had long been kept in gloomy shadow. With his own hands, he pulled back the heavy velvet draperies, letting the brilliant morning sun pour in, banishing the darkness for good.